Chapter 47 Days of the Goddess. The rites of the goddess were meticulously timed. They could only take place on the days appointed according to the Mesopotamian calendar. So as we have seen, the goddess's entrance and the inauguration of a resurrected movement at Stonewall took place at the exact time ordained by the Mesopotamian calendar and the ancient mystery. According to the mystery, it took place in the month of Tammuz and, on the Western calendar, in the month of June. It was set in motion within days of the summer solstice and centered on the full moon of Tammuz, all linked to the goddess. It was all sealed on June 26th, in 1969, the 10th of Tammuz, the day that in the Babylonian calendar was ordained for the casting of spells to cause a man to love a man. But could there be even more to the mystery? Could it be that behind some of the most pivotal events of American culture lies the calendar of the goddess? And could her timing reveal her fingerprints? The Tammuz marches. Before Stonewall, there was a series of protests or pickets on behalf of homosexual rights known as the Annual Reminder or the Reminder March. The protest took place in Philadelphia by Independence Hall every year on Independence Day. They were small and, for the most part, ignored by the media, but after Stonewall, the Reminder March would be moved to New York City and would transform into the Pride Parade. The first Reminder March took place in 1965 in the summer in the ancient month of Tammuz. It fell on Tammuz 4. The second took place in 1966, also in the month of Tammuz, on Tammuz 16. The third in 1967 took place within days of Tammuz. The fourth in 1968 took place on Tammuz 8, and the fifth and last in 1969 took place on Tammuz 18. Thus 80% of those early marches took place in the month of the goddess and her lover Tammuz. All of them took place in or by Tammuz, the same month in which the Stonewall riots broke out. But the reminder marches took place before Stonewall. The timing of the one had nothing to do with the other. The scheduling of the reminder march was based on American history. The timing of Stonewall was based on a deputy police inspector planned raid and an explosion that was planned by no one. Yet they both fell in the ancient Mesopotamian month, connected to the goddess. Beyond that, the first reminder march took place on an ancient Mesopotamian holiday connected to the ceremonial funeral of the goddess's lover. So did another. A third took place on another ancient Mesopotamian holiday, this one appointed for a ceremonial procession in honor of Ishtar's lover. Toward the end of June, then came Stonewall, and from Stonewall the days and weeks and then months of pride. All this would take place, as we have noted, in June, the month that, more than any other, began the observances and celebrations of Tammuz. But the timing was more specific. In his seminal work, Tammuz and Ishtar, after comparing the Sumerian, Assyrian, and Babylonian calendars and Mesopotamian agricultural cycles, Stephen Langdon concludes, this is conclusive evidence that the veilings for Tammuz were held toward the end of June from remotest antiquity. Though the lunar-based calendars of Mesopotamia oscillate with regard to the modern solar-based Gregorian calendar, there are several factors that converge toward the end of June. Though the festival of Tammuz could begin in early June, the central or median time for its beginning is in the days toward the end of June. Further, the summer solstice, of critical importance of the pagan calendar, and linked to the descent of Tammuz, always takes place toward the end of June. It was no accident that beyond the fact that Pride Month was June, its focus was like was always the last days of the month, the days toward the end of June. The commemorations, observances, celebrations and pride parades most often clustered around the days toward the end of June. They would typically be held within a week or just days from the summer solstice, the time of pagan celebration. The first door, legalization of homosexuality. At Stonewall, the goddess forced open an ancient door. It was the first of several such doors and openings. Among the most momentous of these took place in the United States Supreme Court in 3 landmark cases. The first door and first case was that of Lawrence v. Texas in 2003. It resulted in the Supreme Court decision that legalized homosexuality throughout the United States. It would be cited later that same year by the Massachusetts Supreme Court in the ruling that legalized same-sex marriage in that state, the first such legalization in America. Lawrence v. Texas represented the opening of the door that had closed on pagan sexuality in the ancient times. It was thus covered in the goddess's fingerprints. When was the Supreme Court decision handed down? It happened in the summer, in the month of June. It came toward the end of June, the specific time that Langdon had cited for the ceremonies and worship of Tammuz and Ishtar. The timing of the Supreme Court decision had nothing to do with the timing of Stonewall, any more than the timing of Stonewall had anything to do with the timing of the reminder marches. The timing, in this case, was determined by the schedule of functioning of the Supreme Court, and yet every event would converge within days of the others and all at the same time of year, ordained for such things in the ancient calendar. June 26, 2003. More specifically, the ruling that legalized homosexuality across America was handed down on June 26, 2003. June 26th was the same exact date that the Stonewall Uprising was sealed, when its warrant was issued and the legal authorization was given to set everything else in motion. So the ruling that legalized homosexuality across the nation happened to fall on the anniversary of the day Stonewall was sealed. The mystery had ordained it. The second door, overturning the defense of marriage. The second door was forced open in the landmark Supreme Court case of the United States, Windsor, in 2013. It resulted in the ruling that would overturn the Defense of Marriage Act. It would lead to the federal government's recognition of same-sex marriages performed in states where it had, at that point, been legalized. It would also open the door for an even more momentous Supreme Court ruling that would come 2 years later. When was the ruling that overturned the Defense of Marriage Act handed down? It happened in the summer of 2013, in the month of June, within days of the summer solstice, toward the end of June, the days especially identified with the festival of Tammuz. It was handed down in the days of the ancient month of Tammuz. June 26, 2013. On what exact date did the ruling come? The Defense of Marriage Act was overturned on June 26, 2013. 10 years to the exact same day, the Supreme Court legalized homosexuality in 2003. Both of the rulings opening the door to the normalization and establishment of homosexuality fell on the same date, and both of the date that sealed Stonewall, the event that began the opening of that door. The third door, the overturning of marriage. The third door was forced open in the Supreme Court case of Obergefell in Beherches. It resulted in a momentous ruling that would strike down the historic, biblical, and age-old definition of marriage as the union of a man and a woman. It legalized same-sex marriage across America, as marriage was the core relationship of family and family, the core unit of civilization. The transforming of marriage would ultimately mean the transforming of civilization. The ruling would affect law, education, commerce, religion freedom, and virtually every other realm of American culture. It was monumental, and behind it was the hand of the goddess. When did it take place? The historical definition of marriage was struck down in the summer, in the month of June, within days of the summer solstice toward the end of June. Marriage, as it had always been known, was struck down in the ancient month of Tammuz, the month of the goddess's passion. June 26, 2015. When exactly? Marriage as the covenant of man and woman was struck down on June 26, 2015, the same exact date that the Defense of Marriage Act was overturned in 2013, the same exact date that homosexuality was legalized in 2003, and the same exact date that Stonewall was sealed in 1969, and the date that sealed Stonewall was itself the same date on the ancient calendar appointed for the casting of the spell to cause a man to love a man. And so all three landmark events that pushed open the ancient door took place on the exact same date. On top of that, each was the anniversary of the date Stonewall was sealed, which was the beginning of the opening of the door, and which was itself on the ancient calendar the day appointed for a man to love a man, and thus all four events were joined together, and to the ancient day of the ancient spell. Fingerprints of the gods. All three Supreme Court rulings took place on one of the days of Tammuz, the ancient month in which the union of male and female was broken. The 9th of Tammuz was the day of the first torchlight procession commemorating the separation of the male and the female god. It was on that day that marriage and the union of male and female was struck down. It is hard for the modern mind to fathom the idea that the political, cultural, and judicial events of modern times could be determined by an ancient mystery from the Middle East, but the exact convergence of all these events and factors is stunning. No one single person was there, present in each of these events to cause them all to converge. Each series of events was determined by different people, different circumstances, different decisions, different considerations, and different dynamics. One was based on the founding of America, another on a chaotic uprising that no one could have orchestrated, and another on the logistics and workings of the Supreme Court, and yet they all fell into place according to the ancient mystery, all three Supreme Court rulings on the exact same day, and the day Stonewall was sealed. They all converged at a time of special import and intensity on the ancient pagan calendar. They all took place at the same specifically connected to an ancient spirit, and the spirit especially connected to the bending of gender and the altering of sexuality. Night of the Rainbow. On the night that marriage was struck down, a sign appeared across America. It was the sign of the goddess, the rainbow. That night, the sign marked the nation as it never had before. The sign of the goddess lit up the Empire State Building. It lit up waters of the Niagara Falls. It lit up the iconic castle of Disney World. And most dramatically, It lit up the building from which America was governed, the White House. Night of the Ancient Spell. In the ancient Babylonian and Hebrew calendars, each day begins at sundown. The ruling came early in that day that on the ancient calendar was the 9th of Tammuz, but the night that crowned the Supreme Court's overturning of marriage, the night the colors of the rainbow lit up the White House, was a new day on the ancient calendar. It was the 10th of Tammuz. The 10th of Tammuz was the day appointed from the ancient times for the spell to be cast to cause a man to love a man. So the Supreme Court's monumental ruling to overturn marriage, enabling a man to marry a man, was crowned at nightfall by the 10th of Tammuz, the ancient day of the enchantment to cause a man to love a man. The spell had been cast, and the sign of the goddess marked the land, even the house from which the nation was governed. It was a sign of ownership. The spirit of the goddess was moving to take possession of America. To Ishtar belonged the power of metamorphosis, by which she would transform a man into a woman and a woman into a man. But what if her powers of metamorphosis were applied to a culture, a nation, or a civilization? What if the transitioning of a man or woman was a microcosm of the transitioning of an entire culture, nation, and civilization?